Okay, yay. So this is what happens when you're talking to Omar and he says, hey, the next speaker isn't there. I'm like, oh, I have extra presentations, like joking around. And he was like, you're speaking. Those of you who know me well know I like to talk and I like to share and educate. So this topic is on building customer trust by strengthening your security practices. So it's a little different. It's not a technical talk, but more about learning from your customers and trying to learn from them to strengthen your own practices. So I'm not going to do the intro to myself because I've done that, but I'm going to poll you first. So how many of you have received a security questionnaire from a potential customer or given one, right? Good amount, right? Those are always so much fun. So when I think about things, I want to talk about how do you connect the customer and the security mindset, the supplier security mindset, and then how do you leverage those inquiries to learn to push forward your security practices? And then how do you enable your business to improve their security practices? How do we drive those improvements? How do we pull those product teams in? So first, so I'll get another poll. How many of you have a team that actually handles those customer security inquiries that you get? 1, 2-ish, right? Yeah, I'm very lucky in Dell. My team actually handles these inquiries. It's pretty cool to have this team because we could tap into that information. So I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But I want to talk about what's changing. Why is the landscape changing? We used to just start with SDL and vulnerability management and think, okay, we got this, and our customers say, okay, that's great, if they even inquired about it in the first place. But think about you now, right? You're sitting here and you're going to be signing with some vendors. What are the things that you're looking for when you're purchasing them? I mean, those vendors that we're talking out there, right? When even them, when you bring them into your infrastructure, what are their security practices? How do you know that they're good? And what would make you feel uneasy? What about your own practices that make you feel uneasy that your vendors would have? So we used to start and say, okay, we do vulnerability management, we're good. But now the mindset is changing, especially after Log4j, right? I mean, it started changing way back with Heartbleed. And Spectre Meltdown, put us forward again. But Log4j pushed us a whole nother level recently. They want to have multi-factor authentication, right? So it used to be something that was a hardening security practice that now is a must-have from some of our customers. They want to know about our security practices and not just, you do SDL and vulnerability response, but like, what is your SDL? Like, what are your controls? Do you do threat modeling? What else do you do? And then there's the questionnaires that come in. It's sort of like you could go and you could always be reactive to those questionnaires, or you could start thinking about being proactive. That maybe when you go into sales and the customer comes to sales, right away those sales folks know what's going on so that they could better answer those questionnaires. And it's really about building trust way earlier on. And what we're noticing a lot lately is that security weaknesses are top of mind of our customers. So they're like, yeah, you should be fixing vulnerabilities. You should have that already. But what about these weaknesses? Are you fixing those findings? And then all the regulatory, I think we didn't mention it earlier, but there's supposedly like 140 different regulatory things that are going to be coming down to us. How are we going to handle it? How, our customers are going to want to know, are they going to be able to meet compliance to certain things? So when we talk about our mindset here and we think about a customer, their mindset is, oh my gosh, I don't want to get attacked, right? I don't want to violate any of these regulations. I don't want to have reputational damage. And I certainly don't want my stock to go down. And the way that they measure it is about security policies. So they're going to think about what are their own internal policies, but what are all their vendors' policies? And those of you who have gotten recent customer contracts, if you ever looked at them, they're not just saying, hey, you big corp need to have this. They're saying all your vendors need to have these practices in place also. So that vendor vetting process is really important, to make sure that just the same things that a customer is putting on that big vendor, all the vendors underneath that we're using have the same practices too, because that's what your customers are going to expect. And last are those fun industry regulations. How are, do you have an SBOM? Are you going to give me your SBOM? Things like that. So suppliers mindset, typically, I have SCL, I have VR, I'm great, right? I have the basics down. It's just unfortunately not good enough. So how do you approach the customers? How do you understand what's top of their mind? So one of the things that it's been a really good practice, and like I said, I came into Dell and I was lucky enough to have this team, and it was underneath me, and it was already pre-established. But to me, it was really ahead of its curve to think about having that a core team that focuses on customer trust. And it's from having an operational team that can answer those questionnaires that come in or inquiries, or some product might screw up and not, have an old OS or an old log4j version, that 1.x version. How do you handle that? How do you make sure that those inquiries come in and go to someone that could speak to the customer, intelligently about it? How do we enable the business to understand the customer needs? One downside about having a core team do this is that sometimes we're protecting those product teams too well, that they're not feeling the pain. They're not hearing that customer saying, I want this, I want that. So how do you pull that business in? How do you make sure you're educating them? And then also we think about our customer engagement. How are we making sure that our customers see what our security practices are, and that, we are partnering with them, that they're hearing it, and they're not just hearing it from sales, from marketing, but they're actually hearing it from like real security folks. So when you have a customer and their security team is talking to you as a security team, it really is a good partnership. And a lot of the times it's like, oh yeah, I understand the struggle that you guys are going through, SBOM. I'm doing it right now too. So, I get it. What's your journey? And you could really have an honest conversation. Lastly is thinking about the customer security experience. So anybody who talks to a customer, account managers or that customer support person answering the phone somewhere, they need to know how to get to this core team. They need to even know the terminology. When is it that a customer is reporting a vulnerability versus when do they have an inquiry about our practices? So in Dell, this is how we have our program. So we have our customer-facing teams, and it goes to what I call like the level 1. It's a security and customer trust team. Questions like SOC or what if there's an incident. So even beyond product security, we can answer all the security questions. But then within my team, I have this like level 2, this product security customer trust team. So this is when those inquiries get really difficult to answer. Like, do you do this? Do you do that? How was your security design? Did you design like this? The amount of questions that we're getting from our customers are way more intelligent than it ever used to be. We need to have our act together to be able to answer it. With that, we work with the product teams, we work with customer support, we work with sales, we work with the SDL and VR team. So when we think about our journey here with the customers, there's some basics that you just need to have as your start. And if those of you are new into the space or your company's still new, at least make sure you have some of the basics. Assign CVEs, publish the security advisories. Don't let your marketing scare you away from being transparent. I get it. I was in where they were like, oh my gosh, our customers are going to think that we have so many vulnerabilities. Everybody has vulnerabilities, right? Everybody has vulnerabilities. So be transparent about it. Multi-channel communication. If you can have the API, the VEX, if you could go onto a specific product page and see the security information too, besides just your maybe external security advisory page, like get it out there and get it out there as much as you can to your customers. Configuration guides, another thing. They're an afterthought, but there might be things that you allow in your product because of legacy stuff. If you're allowing like TLS 1.0 or something like that, which is scary, but you want that configuration guide to say, you shouldn't enable this, or you're accepting the risk if you enable this. How do you handle the inquiries and questionnaires? How do you make sure that they don't sit in some customer queue for like, like 30 days? That's not good, right? How do you handle the scans? We get like 400-page scan reports. How do you even handle that? How do you process that? How do you go back to the customer to say, hey, listen, I'm not going to process this 400-page scan. You need to go through it and figure out what's important for us to look at. And then a lot of customers are going to ask for the attestation letters. So making sure that you're doing pen testing, making sure that you're doing threat modeling, some of the basics. And then spend the time to train those customer-facing roles. Shift it left. Let sales know about what customer concerns are in security. Let them know about what your practices are so they could build that trust from day one. So these are the basics that I think about when I begin trying to earn a customer's trust. Then we need to continue on the journey. One of the ways to continue on is to learn about the interactions you've had with customers, about the experiences, taking it back to the business, taking it back to your security team. So when we think of Log4j was a lot of work, right? We thought we were doing pretty good. We had a security notice. We had indicated what was affected, what was not affected. We had an FAQ that was publicly posted. We had security advisories for each of the products that were affected. We did this coordination. It wasn't enough, though. We had customers saying, how does your product actually use Log4j? What Log4j version is installed? I said this earlier. We had customers coming to us saying, you need to be on that 2.17.1. We had to go back to the customer and I had to say, listen, my job is to better protect you, and I'm not stopping these teams that are going and right now driving to that 2.16 where that active exploit is. So a lot of time we spent re-educating the customers. We had to do all this clarification about workarounds. There was tons of workarounds for Log4j. Thank goodness there were some workarounds and that we could do workarounds before we had public fixes out. But there was a lot of clarification that we had to do, a lot of hand-holding to step our customers through it. And then the remediation tracking. So that part was even more difficult because we would have customers and Dell has such a huge product portfolio. They'd be like, these are my 50 products. These are the versions of the products. Which ones are affected? When is the fix going to come? So it wasn't enough to just say, hey, PowerEdge was affected. They wanted to know, was PowerEdge version X.X affected, and all their other products. So some of the things that we learned with it and the opportunities we saw is we don't have a clearly defined end of security life. So we had product teams that were only fixing the latest version. If a customer doesn't know that the older versions aren't going to get security fixes, they wouldn't even potentially know that they were affected. How do we get that right awareness out and the education? How do we pull working groups together to help those customers? So definitely some lessons learned we had there. The other thing that we've been learning from is the fund executive order and SBOMs. And we have customers coming to us saying, we want an SBOM, right? We're waiving our money in front of you. We have this checklist. You need to have it. We want an SBOM or we're not going to sign this contract with you. So besides in the background, the processes, the tools and things like that we're working on, we learned that we can't let the customer dictate the SBOM title. Who would have thought that we had to declare and have an article for our customers to talk about what the title is going to be? How do we handle the SBOM versions? How do we have a consistent response across the company? How do we not look disconnected? And what supplier terms need to be updated? We have to have all these vendor partners now. If I have a customer asking me for an SBOM, I need my vendors to have an SBOM. We just signed a contract with this vendor. We didn't put SBOM in there. How are we going to go and get that? So a lot of learning as we got there. Some of the other learnings that we've learned, and these are some of the top customer security concerns that we saw with the common practices, do you do basic VR, vulnerability management, things like that? Do you do false positives? We talked about VEX earlier, indicating if you're affected or not affected. If you indicate you're not affected, they're going to want to know why. My scanner's saying that you use OpenSSL. How do I know you're not affected? So thinking about that. The other thing that I've been really trying to drive is predictable security updates. So a lot of people heard of Patch Tuesday, right? Microsoft's. Trying to get to that. Our customers want to know when they're going to get the next security update. And they want to know that so they could best be prepared to get that update and apply it as fast as they can. They also want that update to not be with features, because when you have that update with features, we all know it takes longer to deploy it and longer to test it. The other thing that we talked about a little earlier was the end of security life. What is my security support life? Is it the same as my standard support? Can I really support security on something for 20 years, right? Let's think about that. If we have a version and another version, and every year we're doing 2 or 3 versions, you could end up having 400 platforms on our client side, Dell laptops that we now just need to support. That means whenever we have one vulnerability, we potentially have to deploy it in 400 different platforms. That's a lot of work. So thinking about that. Lastly, one of the other things we've been getting asked about is, what about our PII? Does your product display the PII? What customer data is collected? What about those log files? What's in the log files? So learnings and drive the upstream improvements into security practices. How do we make sure that we have these security questionnaires already pre-ready for our customers? How do we have the attestation letters already there? How do we do the targeting training for sales and customer security? How do we know what the requirements are from our customers and push them in? How do we know to make sure that we update our SDL controls, because now we have customers asking for these things on a common basis? How do we figure out what our process gaps are from our learnings here? So basically constantly learning from these interactions. When we think about this, one of the things that we had to do, and we have to continue to do, and all of us should do, is educating our customers. If our customers come in and say to us, I'm not going to deploy your product unless I scan and there's 0 vulnerabilities, it's never going to happen. I mean, if that product consumes an OS, there's 5 to 7 vulnerability fixes a day on that OS. How do we educate a customer that that's not a practical decision? How do we educate the customer on coordinated disclosure? The reason why sometimes it might take something longer to fix is that we're working across multiple customers, multiple vendors of theirs, and we want to make sure that we're not 0-daying ourselves. How do we make sure that the customers understand scoring and what CVSS means and how they should figure out their risk based on their environmental factors? So there's all these fun things that are seen and what are not seen in our space here. So we have our little glacier here, and we could talk about what's seen is the behaviors, the results, our actions, but they don't know what's going on in the background. They don't know about this rescoring that's going on, the CVSS scoring. They don't know about our vendor practices. They don't know about my practices. They don't know about these maintenance releases. There's so many things that are not seen that are underneath that you now need to figure out, how are you going to explain that to your customers? It's sort of like when we did the thing with the researcher earlier. The researcher has no clue all the stuff that's going on in the background when you're dealing with this. Neither do most of our customers. So how does this actually build customer trust? So we start off with the basics. We're transparent. We do our security advisories. We do CVEs, right? That's a good way to start building trust. As much as it seems scary to be transparent and say you have a vulnerability, that transparency is really good. Product pages, having that information, having security information, having a one-shop security and trust page, key. How do you go? We have this thing called My Service 360. Basically, if you're a customer, it knows what your systems that you bought, and therefore it's only going to target those security advisories for the systems that you care about. How do you make sure that you have those advisories in a place that's searchable? They could search by CVE, they could search by product, they could search by the date it was updated. Continuing with the building the trust is to make sure that you're constantly learning, reassessing those controls. We have 62 SCL controls in Dell. We take those controls, there's guidance, there's a maturity assessment with it, but sometimes we realize there's gaps, right? How do we take and learn it? How do we get into those governance readouts? So we do quarterly governance readouts with all of our execs from the business units. We're now pulling that information, that customer information, and saying, hey, we had this conversation with customer A. They want us to have A, B, and C. And if we don't, they're not going to buy from us anymore. How do you get that visibility to the execs? How do you make sure that you're investing with customer-facing teams, having that transparency, that multi-channel notifications out there in a better way, think about the APIs that we're talking about with VEX and stuff like that that's coming down. Customers are going to have to handle this very quickly, so we need to make sure we're improving that. When we think about our customer security needs, everything in the threat landscaping is constantly changing, so we need to make sure we're changing with it. So there's just tons of regulations that we have, more coming. How do we meet them? Which ones do we meet? Which ones can we do a phased approach to meet? How much money is it going to cost us? How do we do artificial intelligence to help our customers better? So many different things to think about. Lastly, I want to talk about the business. So when we started some of our maturing of our security practices, like the security update cadence and the end of security support, we were talking to engineers. We were talking to the wrong people. We had to talk to product management. They are the right business stakeholders. Now, if any of you are product managers or talk to product managers, if you don't talk to them in their language, they're not going to pay attention to you. So you need to think about profit going down, about not making money, about a customer not buying, and bring those examples in. You need to push that customer first mentality that those product managers have and talk about how security fits into it. You need to think about your stakeholders and understand the impact, right? So that they understand that if they don't do some of these product security practices, they are not going to have those customers anymore. So the other thing that I've learned about product management is understanding your competitors. What are they doing? What are their security practices? If I could sit there and say, competitor A, B, and C is doing this and we're not, it's a solid win. If I could say competitor A is doing it but not B and C, it's still a good win because we could be ahead of the curve. So think about how aggressive they are with product management. And when we think about the competitiveness, the sales opportunity, the business impact, we need to think about all of these type of things and how to get product management engaged with those customers in those conversations and hearing that pain. So in closing, understand your customers' product security concerns, right? Utilize it. Find out who handles those concerns, those inquiries. Bring that knowledge in. Use that knowledge to better your practices. We're all here because we want to mature ourselves, our company, in security. Our customers want that too. If you use customers in your arguments, in your push, in every conversation, you're going to be better at pushing those maturity practices. Get the stakeholder buy-in. So think about product management, pull them into your conversations. And lastly, don't be afraid to share your journey. We may not have security update cadences for every product right now at Dell, but we're on a journey and I'm not afraid to talk about that journey. At least my customers know that I'm thinking about these. Are you thinking about this? Are they thinking about that? They're going to know that we're on a journey and they're going to trust in the fact that we've delivered a lot and that we're going to continue our journey to deliver more. Hey, yes, that was a lot. They told me to be a little short. So are there any questions? Everybody just wants to get to Jeopardy. Oh, anyone? There you go, Jim. It would be great, but that executive order that we all love says, well, it's already published, so we might have missed that, but it says attestation, and they're trying to figure out what that actually means and how to deliver it. I don't know if we're going to win, Jim, but yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree. So Jim was talking about the word attestation, and what was your suggestion, Jim? Which word do you? Affirmation instead. But the executive order talks about, attestation. It's been a common practice, but I do understand it's overloaded because it's in health fields and other areas. You have another question, Jim? Yeah. It is log for shell. The vulnerability was log for shell. I agree. The incident was log for shell. However, it was log for J and the nightmare afterwards when they had the 2.17, the 2.17.1, where we had customers saying, hey, you need to be on the latest and greatest. Why aren't you? And I'm like, that's business as usual. We have typical SLOs of how quickly we address that. We're not going to stop everything. I just had teams spending weeks and weeks and losing their holiday break. Yes, I agree. I agree, Jim. Yep. Yeah. Anyone else? They're like Jeopardy. Okay. I get another gift. I'll take it.
That's good. Thank you.
I got one for each kid now.
There you go. With what's in there, you might need it.